Sam Elliott built his career on characters of quiet strength, men who rarely needed words to command respect. But behind one of his most memorable roles, there was a story audiences never saw. The making of Tombstone was filled with chaos, heartbreak, and decisions that would forever shape the film. Elliot has since revealed the hidden truth of what unfolded, and his confession changes how we see the movie. What he shared was not about action or gunfights, but about loss, compromise, and the weight of carrying on when a vision begins to collapse. When filming began in the spring of 1993, Elliot felt something rare in Hollywood: genuine pride. At 50, he had built a career on rugged supporting roles, but stepping into the boots of Virgil Earp, Wyatt's older brother, felt different. Kevin Jarrett's script impressed him from the very first read. Unlike most westerns that lived for shootouts and standoffs, this one cared about the men behind the guns. Each character had flaws, dignity, and purpose. For Elliot, who valued truth above spectacle, it felt like the perfect role. But almost immediately after shooting began in Arizona, cracks started to show. Kevin Jarre, though gifted as a writer, had never directed a film, and Elliot noticed the problems right away. By the third day, scenes dragged on endlessly. Jarre favored long, sweeping shots that looked like they belonged in a John Ford classic, but drained the intimacy and fire from the story. Close-ups that could have captured raw emotion were abandoned in favor of wide frames that left performances adrift. Cinematographer William Fraker tried to steer Jarre toward different choices, but Jarre resisted, clinging to his vision. Elliot, true to his nature, didn't speak out loudly, but he felt the unease settling in his bones. He wasn't worried about his own role. He was worried for the survival of the film itself. By the end of the first month, production was behind schedule. The budget was groaning, and Disney's Christmas release deadline loomed dangerously close. The studio lost patience. Kevin Jarre, who had dreamed this story into life, was abruptly dismissed. For the cast, it felt like watching the captain of their ship thrown overboard mid-voyage. Elliot later admitted that the sadness was heavy. He respected Jarre's writing and his heart, and to see him forced out so suddenly felt like a betrayal, even if it was necessary. George P. Cosmatos was brought in to steady the ship, but as Elliot would later confess, the true savior of Tombstone wasn't Cosmatos at all. It was Kurt Russell. Behind the scenes, Russell began writing nightly shot lists, streamlining the script, and quietly directing without ever being credited. Val Kilmer, who was living in Russell's guest house during filming, remembered how they would stay up late piecing together the next day's work. Elliot respected Russell's determination, but in his heart, he knew something important had already been lost. Nearly 30 pages of Jarre's script, many of which gave Virgil and Morgan Earp their most human, emotional moments, were cut. What remained was still powerful, but the heart of the story had been weakened. Elliot admitted that if he had known his role would be reduced so drastically, he might not have accepted it. The set itself soon became a battlefield. Cosmatos demanded discipline and speed, often clashing with Fraker over artistry versus efficiency. Their tension boiled over so badly that one day they even rammed golf carts into each other. 17 crew members eventually quit under Cosmatos' sharp-edged leadership. Through it all, Elliot stayed steady, just like Virgil himself. He described the shoot as both brilliant and painful. Brilliant because of the performances the cast poured into their roles, but painful because the film seemed to be crumbling behind the camera. Adding to the pressure was another storm brewing just down the road. Kevin Costner was filming Wyatt Earp, a rival production with twice the budget, more time, and the weight of Costner's stardom behind it. Russell grew anxious, worried that audiences wouldn't care about their smaller, scrappier film when a 3-hour epic was waiting in the wings. Elliot, however, remained firm. One night, when Russell voiced his doubts, Elliot cut him off with words that carried the same rugged certainty he brought to Virgil. They don't have this script, and they don't have this cast. He believed in Jarre's dialogue. in the chemistry of the actors, and in the raw energy their film carried. History proved him right. When Tombstone was released on December 24, 1993, it earned $56 million at the box office, more than double what Wyatt Earp made 6 months later. Costner's film, though beautifully shot, was weighed down by its length, while Tombstone became a cult classic, quoted by fans for decades. Elliot had never doubted it. He trusted the words, the cast, and the truth that heart always outshines spectacle. Yet Elliot's pride in the finished film always carried a quiet ache. He admitted years later that nearly 30 pages of Virgil's story had been stripped away, pages filled with family dinners, moral struggles, and moments of connection. Without them, Virgil was left in the background, when he had been meant to serve as the moral center of the story. Still, Elliot refused to let his character vanish. On set, he fought small battles, slipping fragments of dialogue back into his scenes, holding pauses a little longer, or adding subtle gestures that spoke volumes. In doing so, he protected what little of Virgil remained. One overlooked scene captures it best, when Virgil rescues a child before the violence of the OK Corral. It's a fleeting moment, almost buried in the chaos, but it reveals who Virgil truly was, a man of duty, not rage. Critics later called Elliot the moral anchor of Tombstone, his presence grounding the fire and spectacle around him. That strength mirrored Elliot himself, who stayed loyal to the film even when it betrayed parts of his character. Decades later, Elliot still describes Tombstone as both brilliant and painful. Brilliant because it endured and became beloved. Painful because he knew what it could have been. He often said he wished audiences could have seen Jara's full vision, where Virgil and Morgan stood equally beside Wyatt and Doc. But in the strange poetry of fate, Elliot found himself living out Virgil's truth. Just as the character carried responsibility without glory, Elliot carried the weight of loyalty and sacrifice. He gave Virgil a soul even when much of it was cut away, and in doing so, left fans with a character who still lingers decades later. Sam Elliott's confession reminds us that behind the triumph of Tombstone lies a story of struggle, loss, and resilience. His Virgil may not have had the spotlight, but he remains the film's quiet conscience, the man who bore the weight so the legend could survive.